Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. Very soon, Season 3 of Diablo 4. The Season of the Construct offers us an unexpected form of seasonal power, a companion construct, which is a bold concept in Diablo 4 where they've really not got companion anything working very well. We're talking about the 5 classes and how have things changed in Season 3. The patch notes have finally dropped and now we can do some speculation and theory crafting. What's going to be the best class going into Season 3? Maybe even long term? What does that even mean? Well, to answer that, we can take a look at how things were in the previous season. In short, Necromancer dominated the early season, meaning leveling. Both Season 1 and Season 2, Necromancer was winning that. Even multiple or long lists of Necromancers were winning and reaching level 100 first. But then you go beyond leveling and it's a very different story. Rogues had their biggest spike before other classes thanks to the hilarious ability to break the combo point limit that was found as soon as people started getting to Bolt's Will. The devs had been still too afraid to fix anything since that would be a technical nerf. They left it alone. So Rogue was cleaning out world bosses, target bosses, pretty much faster than anyone else, immediately getting so much power from one item. However, 2 classes reached even higher long term once they started to get all their proper gear and setup. That was of course Sorcerer, and even more so in the abattoir, Barbarian. Now since this video is based on patch notes and theory, I want you guys to take it with a grain of salt. My predictions for Season 2 were that Sorcerer was going to be one of the stronger classes, if not the strongest, and I thought Barbarian would actually fall behind quite a lot. Barbarian in particular because they got a lot less love in the patch notes leading into the season compared to say Sorcerer, which got major changes. And yeah, the result of that wasn't entirely wrong, but it was certainly wrong about Barbarian. So theory only goes so far. You don't know until you really see it. For Barbarian, it was all about overpower, and that's a big topic in these notes. Blizzard have now stated that it was a bit too strong in Season 2, and it was Barbarian, of course, making the best use of it in Season 2. Pretty comical when you look at the long lists of Barbarians who were dominating the abattoir and reaching the higher tiers first. The list was like 90% Barbarians, a couple Sorcerers, and then a mix of the rest of the classes. Overall, though, for Season 2, here's how I placed the classes for Season 2. I had Druid at number 5 at the bottom due to a lack of any real impressive output for most of the season, even though the builds were decent enough, and of course easier to get their hands on thanks to unique farming being in the game. They never really pushed any barriers. Necromancer was my number 4, with some reasonable showings in the abattoir, even though they didn't have anything clearly broken and not intended, like the top 3. Rogue being number 3, since, you know, the comical combo point exploit was nuts for them, but its consistent DPS and squishy in nature meant that it still fell behind the other 2. Sorcerer was my number 2, with very impressive leveling, incredible mid to late game, strong as hell showings in the true end game, but with Barbarian eclipsing everyone, you just couldn't compete. They had better survivability, DPS, burst. They just had more raw power, and that was so clear with the abattoir. But in hindsight, I still wouldn't have said Barbarian was like the top class, the one you should be playing. Their leveling and gearing up experience is still miserable. So while their highs were certainly the highest, there's still a big wall between that and having the power. Meanwhile, Sorcerers just get going straight away, start to finish, only ever falling behind slightly at the true pinnacle content. So Season 2, I would still say Sorcerer was best overall. With that context complete of how I rate things and understand things, let's now talk about Season 3 and the class rankings in theory. We'll talk about leveling, mid to late game, and of course the pinnacle endgame, because there is going to be new pinnacle endgame challenges, which we should expect in Season 3, even if it's not abattoir. Starting with leveling. I still think it's going to be Necromancer. It's been number 1 in both seasons for a reason, and I think that's not going to change. What has changed, of course, is overpower, and that's going to affect the main leveling build for Blood Surge. Their stance on overpower was that it was too strong. We now know that overpower attacks are going to get 1% damage per 1% of your base life. You have in Fortify, which used to be 2%, and they've also changed the attacks gaining 2% per 1% of your base life that you have in bonus life above base life. That's down to 1% as well. So basically both were at 2%, they're now down to 1%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is half of what it was. We're gonna have to see in testing how impactful this really is. In terms of blood builds and leveling specifically, I wouldn't be worried about Bloodlance winning over Surge. I still rate Surge way higher because it's just an AoE immediately. Lance is way more gear dependent, requiring different aspects to make its strength show and actually start AoE clearing well. So Necromancer speed leveling is still looking very good, and with Bone Spear largely left alone in the patch notes, maybe it'll be eclipsed by Bone Spirit, with the changes to that, we'll see. But during leveling, I still think it's going to be Necromancer with the Blood Surge leveling up, swapping to Bone Spear late, and that's only going to be better with how we're heavily relying on Iron Maiden during leveling. That's a great way to generate essence, which we're desperate for while leveling and lacking gear, and they buffed that to actually provide more damage. So hopefully we feel that. I do think in terms of the leveling race, we'll see Rogue and Sorcerer following on behind again, since they have just such immediate power and spikes early, as well as great mobility. Sorcerers get their enchantments, Rogues get their power spike with specialization unlocks, and that all comes very early, and they start to fly through the areas and zones compared to the slow Necromancer, so it will be competitive. The construct may change things, we'll see. I still reckon though, Druid and Barbarian are going to have a hard time powering up because they still demand specific uniques and a lot of gear before they really start to fly. Moving on to the mid to late game section, this is the part where we're going to be spending most of our time in World Tier 4, powering up and pushing to say Nightmare Dungeon Tier 100 clears, farming the target bosses, or doing the new vaults, which is probably going to be our main focus based on what they've said. Let's look at the king of this section back in Season 2 first, that being Sorcerer. The Sorcerer had a surprisingly small amount of changes in the notes, but what they do have is pretty impactful changes. Now obviously their main build for that season was Ball Lightning, and while there were multiple ways you could run that, the core being Ball Lightning was what was so strong. We couldn't place our finger on exactly why it was just so busted, and we were wondering whether it was like a bug with the attack speed they weren't acknowledging, but we finally have our answer in these patch notes. Turns out Ball Lightning was bugged, and its damage that it was dealing was too much. According to the notes, because of the enhanced upgrade, it was giving way more than it should have. So with Season 3 fixing that, the damage is going to be noticeably less. Further, the Static Surge legendary node, that was triggering from automatic casts of skills like say Chain Lightning enchantment, and that's gone too. This was used as a great source of mana regen and a lot of different synergies from that happening. With that gone, that's another big hit. Now it's not all bad for Sorcerers, they've had a good few changes, like now they finally have a ranged vulnerable option, but there's a lot of questions around key items like the Telrasher ring, and you know, how strong Ball Lightning really will be with the changes. They still have incredible alternative builds to Ball Lightning, like say Blizzard. They're still going to be in a strong position, that's what I think. Next, let's talk Druids, which should be a lot better in Season 3. Since they're able to get their target, uniques from the farming bosses, they're going to get stronger a lot sooner again, and across the board, they are getting better, with Stormclaw and Lightning Storm builds having the most potential. Avian Wrath and its crit damage, that is now finally a multiplier instead of additive, and that's essentially a sweeping buff for Druids as a whole, going to be very impactful. They're also making efforts to make Rabies much more effective, which is a really weird sentence to say, but we're not yet convinced it's going to be insane. That needs testing. They have that new unique for Lightning Storm though, and Stormclaw is definitely going to benefit from the new basic skill boosting unique, Pain Gorgeous Gauntlets, so there's big potential there. And that's what I would say about Druid. There's a lot of hope, a lot of potential, but we really need to see in testing. Moving on, one class that always stands out in the mid to late game is certainly Rogue, which seems to be much more range based in Season 3. This comes about because of the nasty nerfs to Twisting Blades, with the devs clearly pushing, range playstyles, most specifically the penetrating shot. The range uniques were all improved, that being Windforce, Skyhunter, and Eaglehorn, so maybe they'll be a lot more relevant and impactful on range builds, but it certainly seems like penetrating shot will be a contender for a top Rogue build, with Twisting Blades maybe at long last no longer being the best pick. As interesting as all that is, I actually think Rogue is going to be one of the weaker classes in Season 3 if the range stuff doesn't pan out, impressively. With Tibalt's Will and the combo point break thing being gone, it's simply a massive amount of power being removed from Rogue, and Twisting Blades was their long-term competitive build in the meta. That's been nerfed massively. So, Rogue is the class I'm most unsure about for these power rankings. Hopefully the range stuff ends up really strong. But that of course brings us to the true endgame consideration, who's going to be at the top when we're fully geared and maxed out, having farmed everything we need and working on our uber uniques. We can't say for sure how this is truly going to pan out. There's a lot of testing and changes to consider, but I do think it's safe to value Barbarians very highly here. They're still going to be nuts, from their survivability to their party utility with their shouts and their damage output. Yeah, there's this kind of nerf to Hammer of Ancients that can't really be ignored. Apparently there was an issue with the Quakes from the Hammer aspect that did that, dealing way more damage than intended. It was specifically the outer edge though, and they said that they don't want the strength to be reliant on a bug, so that suggests to me that Hammer's still going to be strong, probably still a top build overall. But what's way more exciting is how interesting the charge build looks, and if that's going to be busted, could that be like like the new Ball Lightning. This is because of the new aspect they're getting, Ancestral Charge, which spawns in these 4 Ancients that are going to charge with you, dealing 50 to 100% of normal damage. If they're dealing as much as you are, that sounds insane. And they fixed the problem where charge didn't properly carry enemies with you in prep for that, and that's on top of the charge damage being up, so it does sound good. I hope it turns out well. They are going to be adjusting the shouts too via the Echoing Fury aspect and the Martial Glyph. The glyph means non-shout skills are going to get a hefty 4-second cooldown cut compared to before, where it would make other shouts have their cooldowns cut by 1.2 seconds. So less shouting all the time, so just maybe Barbarians will get to use something other than 3 shouts all the time. We'll see. Basically, Barbs aren't really getting any insane nerfs from what I see. It's going to be interesting to see if they end up on top again. But yeah, what do you guys think? I'm thinking Necromancer is going to stand out again as the best leveler just because of how instantly effective Blood Surge is with the new overpower system, even if it's nerfed. Bone Spear wasn't really changed. So the moment you have crit and the basic aspects, say around World Tier 3, you should be flying on that. And with the slight improvements to one of their core leveling skills, it's looking good. I am most concerned about Rogue though, which has taken that massive hit with the loss of the combo point breaking thing and Twisting Blades being nerfed too. If the range stuff they're doing doesn't work out, it's going to be bad. And Druids maybe have the most interesting unknown potential in Season 3. Their standing's going to be looking a lot better, but how high will that actually be? I still think Barbarians are going to be hyper strong. They seem to benefit the most from the new overpower system, even if it's reduced slightly. And with the hope for the charge stuff, if that turns out great, they could be nuts yet again. I also still have high hopes for Sorcerer. Even though they've taken some big hits with Ball Lightning, they still had some really strong builds around that. Entirely new builds are going to exist that are going to make everything unknown, like Necromancer with Bone Spirit, the Rogue range builds, Druids as a whole. Time is going to tell after testing. Theory only takes you so far. But let us know what you think. I hope this was an interesting discussion. But for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.